Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, tales of mishaps, misfortune, and misadventure. I'm your host, Rich Napolitano. Today I'm pleased to have with me naval historian Chris Sams, who has a number of things that he does, including a podcast and such, but I'll let him tell you about that. Welcome so much, Chris Sams. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having me. Long-term fan of the show.
Oh, thank you. Just to start out, tell everybody a little bit about all of the work that you do in terms of maritime history.
So, yeah, I wrote, many years ago now, 2015, I wrote a book on German cruiser warfare in the First World War, and it kind of became a gateway into more and more naval history. In 2019, I got divorced, which meant I had far much more time to do naval history. So I've worked on another podcast. I do research for other people. I've got my Substack, which I write far too many words on naval history, including the weekly podcast. And just generally trying to carry the flag to show that naval history is actually a lot more interesting than many people believe it is.
Well, I, for one, read your Substack every time it comes out, and I listen to your podcast. And I would say that you're one of the most knowledgeable historians out there about naval history.
Oh, thank you.
So today, of course, I've invited you to talk about the Battle of Jutland, which was one of the most significant battles of World War I, naval battles anyway, and in particular, its use of battleships or dreadnoughts, as we say. So we're going to talk about that, but how about we first set the stage? Now, we're not going to rehash the entire causes of World War I and everything. That's far too detailed, but let's set the stage for the Battle of Jutland. What was happening at this point in the war, and what was the situation in terms of the German fleet and the British Royal Navy?
Well, the big problem for Germany is the North Sea, because Germany, being mostly landlocked, does require merchant ships to bring in raw materials, especially things for making shells and gems and oil and things. And the British do exactly what they did against Napoleon, which is build a massive blockade of ships so nothing can get in through the North Sea. So Germany has had to think, sort of pre-war and then going into the First World War, how do we deal with a blockade? And by 1914, the big onus would be, well, the fleet's going to have to go out and defeat the British. And the British are really, really looking forward to this because they haven't had a massive naval victory since Trafalgar. They haven't had a loss since the War of 1812, but that goes out the window in November 1914. But they want the Germans to come out. They want to have another Trafalgar. They want to trounce the German fleet, and then they can do whatever they want. They can go and bombard the German coastlines. It gives them so much leeway. And there are certain elements in the German Admiralty who want what they refer to as der Tag, the big day, that they could go out, trounce the British. Luckily, there are lots of more intelligent people within the German Admiralty who say that's a stupid idea. And so they come up with different ways to try and fight in the North Sea. And the British strike first, they attack Helgoland Bight, and then the Germans start raiding towns on the northeast of the British coast, like Scarborough, Yarmouth. And the aim is that the British will send ships out to chase the German ships, and they can pull back onto larger German ships and sink them, whittle them down slowly. After Dogger Bank, the Kaiser is a bit more reluctant to risk his battleships. So the U-boat arms step up and say, hold my beer, we've got this. And so they start carrying out anti-shipping against merchant ships. That doesn't go well. You have the Lusitania, then the Arabic incident, and America basically says, if you keep sinking ships, we're going to get involved, and Germany sort of back off. So beginning of 1916, the ball is back in the fleet's court. Many people think like the German Navy be a homogeneous lump. It's three separate arms, with the Zeppelin arm, the U-boat arm, and the battleship arm, and they're all kind of vying for control. Well, in 1916, Scheer takes over the fleet, and he demands to have access to both the other arms. They're all now subordinate to his ships, and he wants to carry out an aggressive war. And the Kaiser kind of agrees as long as he doesn't put the fleet in risk. And that's really important. Go out and do what you have to, but do not risk the fleet, because we can't replace it. And so you have in April, you have the Lowestoft raid, where Hipper is sick, so they use Bodecker leads the battlecruisers. They attack Lowestoft, and they try to draw small elements of the British fleet, preferably Beatty's battlecruisers, onto the German battleships. But the British know what they're doing, and when they see the smoke of the battleships, the British pursuers pull off and leave them. So by the beginning of May 1916, they're getting ready for another much bigger operation.
And of course, the one of the tactics used here was by the Royal Navy was, like you said, to blockade Germany, and that was a big problem for them. They were really suffering as a result of this blockade. So, do you think that was a motivation for the High Seas Fleet to try to put a dent in the Royal Navy fleet at the time?
Oh, absolutely. The blockade is just starting to bite. It's not quite up to the level. By 1918, they're drinking acorn-made coffee, Einsatzkaffee. But by 1916, it is starting to bite. And the German army are kind of going over to the defensive. But they're holding the line. I mean, about a month after this, you get the First Battle of the Somme. The German army are throwing troops into Verdun. And there's lots of questions of, what are the Navy doing? Why aren't you doing anything? And so you've also got that pressure as well, that the Navy, this much overspent on Navy, should be doing something to, instead of sitting on its backside in Wilhelmshaven. So you've got the blockade, and then you've got a lot of social and political pressure as well, that the Kaiserliche Marine should be doing something.
And the High Seas Fleet of Germany obviously were outnumbered by the Royal Navy. So you mentioned trying to lure them out a little bit at a time to pick them off. And that's frankly a good strategy, in my opinion, since they did not have numbers. But leading into the end of May of 1916, things are starting to take shape in terms of the Battle of Jutland that would take place. So describe the situation leading right up to the battle in terms of where the fleets were positioned and perhaps some of the intelligence that had been gathered or perhaps not gathered.
Yeah, not gathered on one side and totally gathered on the other. The majority of the German fleet is around Wilhelmshaven, Kiel, and the Jade Estuary, and they're building up. They wanted to go earlier in May, but the battlecruiser Seydlitz was damaged during the Lowestoft raid, and they don't think that she's going to be ready for action till the 29th of May, so they push back go day. They've dispatched U-boats to the main British ports near Scapa and the Firth of Forth to watch for the Grand Fleet, because they don't want to engage the Grand Fleet. I can't stress that enough, because a lot of people, when I get to the Jutland conclusion, they'll often say different things, but the main thing of the German fleet is not to engage Jellicoe. Unfortunately, the orders don't go out to all the U-boats for different reasons, and only 2 of them get the delayed date. The weather's awful, so Zeppelins can't go up, because they were going to use Zeppelins for aerial reconnaissance as well. But they think, that's all right, we'll just have to go without them, because the U-boats can only stay on station till the 2nd of June. So time is of the essence. The British, they've kind of realised something was building, and so Beatty and his battlecruisers have moved south to the Firth of Forth, and the main battleships are still at Scapa Flow, and they're on readiness alert. What the Germans don't realise is that in 1914, the light cruiser Magdeburg they know it was sunk, or beached. The Russians got all the code books and promptly gave them to the British. And then after the Battle of Texel in 1914, a German destroyer tossed a strongbox over the side, and when some fishermen went back and pulled it up, it was full of German code books. So they know exactly what's going on, and they know that there's a fleet build-up, and that that some of them are going to go to sea. But there is a slight glitch, and it's one of my favourite glitches in history. We've all worked with this guy, the one Jobsworth. He's because Scheer has a radio signal for when he's in port, and then one when he's on ship. And when he's in port, it's DK. Well, the Navy go to room 40, the civilian code breakers, and say, where is code DK? And he said, that's easy, it's in Wilhelmshaven. And they go, oh, cool, so Scheer's not gone to sea. Not sort of taking into account that Scheer is if they'd have asked the right question of where is Scheer, they would have said, oh, he's on the German flagship and they're leaving port. But they asked, where is DK? So they think that Scheer is staying in port. So both fleets are going to sea without knowledge that the battleships of either side are going to sea at this point.
And what would you say were the intended goals of each side as the fleets were starting to converge toward the end of May?
Well, I think Scheer's goals were fairly simple, and I think he was expecting quite a quiet run of it, because he's brought some pre-dreadnought battleships with him, which have no place in a battle with dreadnought battleships. They won't last. They aren't designed to deal with plunging shot. They're only about 7 years old, but because dreadnought came out in 1905 and these were still on the slips, they were actually obsolete before they hit the water. But he's brought them with him, and I've argued in the past that the reason he brought them was he wasn't expecting to see dreadnoughts, and every gun you've got is a bonus. He's just hoping that Hipper's going to go out, they're going to do a sweep of like the Dogger Bank, because they think that British fishing ships are actually wirelessing in German positions. And so they're going to sweep up all these trawlers, inspect them. If Beatty turns up, or one of the light cruiser squadrons, Hipper will just draw them onto the battleships, they'll decimate them, then they'll turn around and go home. Jellicoe's not sure what's happening. He just knows that there is a large German force out there and they want to obliterate it. They're hoping, again, that it's Hipper's battlecruisers. So if they can get in, sink those, it's going to be a real problem for the German fleet, because they'll never be able to replace them. And so he sent Beatty probing off to the south to try and find what German ships are there. And ultimately, Jellicoe may not be needed in the same way that they had at Dogger Bank, that the battlecruisers could just have their own action, defeat Hipper, and then come back. But it rapidly falls apart quite quickly.
And at what point did the two sides spot each other and realize that they were going to start to engage?
Well, it all kind of starts... Well, the U-boats have spotted them when they leave port. But because the British are going out, they head north, or the Germans misread their positions and say that they're heading north. And so when those signals get passed back, Scheer thinks that the British Grand Fleet aren't coming, they're going the other way. But at 2:30, a Danish ship, the NJ Fjord, is sighted in the sort of North Sea, off Jutland, and it's been stopped by two torpedo boats, the B-109 and the B-110. So the Galatea and another cruiser go off to go and see what's going on. They fire on 109 and 110, so they pull away, and they run into the German light cruiser Elbing, who scores the first hit of the battle when she strikes Galatea. The Germans then see these battle cruisers coming towards them and think, right, well, let's get out of here. So they turn to Hipper. Hipper sees the battle cruisers, go, excellent, this is just what we want, and he turns to the south and starts to lead Beatty towards Scheer's position. And the British are at a bit of a disadvantage, partially because the weather's it's pretty crappy. It's quite foggy and misty, so it's very hard to spot. The other thing is they're moving at such speed that the coal smoke from the funnels and also gun smoke from their guns is obscuring the view of the ships behind them, whereas the Germans have got a perfect view of them. They're also hindered by the fact that Sir David Beatty is in charge, because he is... There's two kinds of admirals. It's the same with generals. You've got the slow, steady thinker in Jellicoe, and then you've got the hooray Henry that will go charging into action. Think the naval version of Custer as Beatty. He's seen the enemy, he's chasing them, and he doesn't give clear instructions. And in doing so, he's got 4 fast battleships with him, the Queen Elizabeth class. They've got the speed of a battlecruiser, the armour and the armament of a battleship, so they're really, really good. One of them is the greatest battleship of all time, HMS Warspite. He doesn't tell them where he's going, so that for about 10-15 minutes they're going in the wrong direction, and so they have to turn to catch up with him, which means for the first part of the run to the south, he doesn't have his big guns with him. As they get to the German line of battlecruisers, they pull alongside, and the general order is the ship at the front fires at the ship at the front, German ship at the front, and then all the way down the line. Well, that doesn't get communicated properly, so the second German ship in the line, the Derfflinger, isn't actually being targeted by anyone, and the Moltke is getting targeted by 2. German fire is also really accurate. It's slower than the British, but it's accurate, whereas the British believe that the more shells you put in the air, the more likely you are to hit something, and that means that they have unwritten instructions to leave the magazine doors open so that you can pass the shells through quicker. Unfortunately, for 2 of the battlecruisers. That results in them detonating and taking pretty much the entire cruise to the bottom.
Oh, gosh.
Well, the first one to get hit was HMS Lion, which is Beatty's flagship. And Q turret gets hit. There's a fire in the turret. And the mortally wounded Major Francis Harvey of the Royal Marines, he closes the door and floods the compartment and stops an explosion. In true British style, whenever there's a disaster, we hand out Victoria Crosses. And so he got a Victoria Cross for that. 1602 is the Indefatigable explodes after taking 3 11-inch shells from the Von der Tann. 2 men survive out of 1,019. And at 4:25, the Queen Mary explodes with only 9 survivors out of 1,275.
Wow.
And then 3 minutes after that, the Princess Royal is obscured by smoke and spray after being hit by a salvo. And one of the signallers goes running up to Beatty and says, Princess Royal's gone as well. And this is allegedly where he says that the quote that is attributed to him, which is, Chatsfield, there seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today. But the Princess Royal was fine. It was just smoke and steam. But then they run into Scheer.
Yeah, this opening engagement clearly went to the Germans in terms of casualties and damage to ships. So this battle is interesting because it kind of happens in a number of stages where some different tactics are used. So after this opening engagement, what tactics were used by both sides in terms of how they would respond to this?
Well, the Germans were quite happy at first because Hipper's, sort of, as I said, he's got this steady return of fire and it's really quite accurate, whereas the British are just trying to fire as often as quickly as possible. They also use their destroyer. Both the British and the Germans use their destroyers quite niftily to try and break up each other's lines with torpedo runs. And so they're sort of darting in between the two fleets, trying to put torpedoes into the enemy. The Seydlitz takes a torpedo, but continues to stay in the battle. But Hipper is just holding firm to, I just need to keep going, because over there is Scheer, and when we get to the battleships, we'll take Beatty apart. We'll cause some real damage. And when they get to Scheer, they peel off and turn around. Beatty sees them. He sees all this vast array of German battleships and immediately turns north. But again, fails to tell the 4 battleships that are with him. So they go screaming past Beatty as they're turning north. He quickly signals them and says, turn around. But instead of turn together, he gets them to turn in order. So they all get to the same patch of sea, then turn 180, which means all the Germans have to do is aim for that one patch of sea, and they can catch each battleship as it goes through. Thankfully, the captain of the Malaya messes up his move and turns early. So when the German fire comes in, it misses both the 3rd and 4th ship in the line. And then they bring up the rear of the British formation, and because they're better armoured than battlecruisers, so they can absorb all the German fire. And now the whole German fleet just moves as one, with Hipper pulling to the front, but with Scheer just behind to chase Beatty's squadron north, hoping that they can overtake them.
With Beatty retreating now, heading north, and the Germans are going to chase, were they hoping to catch up with the main Grand Fleet?
Beatty is, yes. He's hoping to get to Jellicoe and sort of report Scheer's position, okay. And so that it's kind of the inverse of Trafalgar, whereas where you have like the Franco-Spanish line and then Nelson cuts into it. By the First World War, you want to be the line.
Right. What
Jellicoe would be hoping is to form a line of all his battleships, present his broadside. The Germans would come. It's called crossing the T, so they would come at a vertical angle into Jellicoe's line and just be bombarded. And so that's the plan. However, Beatty hasn't told Jellicoe where he is or where they're coming from. So Jellicoe's at a point where he's trying to figure out where to put his forces. And he's got a squadron of battlecruisers under Admiral Hood to try and scout for Beatty, and Admiral Arbuthnot's first cruiser squadron are trying to form a van for the battleships, and they're all trying to get into formation and hope they'll be in formation and in the right place for when the Germans arrive. And so it's a bit of feeling around in the dark.
You mentioned that Jellicoe wasn't informed of what was happening. That seemed to happen a few times, in addition to getting some faulty information.
Well, yeah, this becomes one of the big bones of contention after the battle. There's a massive inquiry as to why things didn't pan out, and unfortunately for Jellicoe, he gets promoted sideways, and Beatty gets put in charge of the Grand Fleet, and he writes his own history as to what happened. And it's only been in sort of recent years that Jellicoe's being seen in a brighter light, but it's sort of a common theme throughout the battle that Jellicoe doesn't quite get all the information he needs, and so with the best of information he's got, he sets his line and kind of hopes for the best. But he's starting to get reports from Hood as to where, because Hood runs into Beatty, who's going in the opposite direction, and sees the fleet and sort of starts to communicate, look, they are coming this way. I think you're in the right position. And that's when Jellicoe sort of pulls up and waits for them. And you start getting an action in what's called Windy Corner, where the fleets start to converge, like the HMS Chester, which is a light cruiser, which is part of Hood's squadron, gets heavily hit by German battlecruisers, and then the Wiesbaden, German light cruiser, similarly gets into the wrong place and gets hit by German battlecruiser fire. And then Arbonaut sees the Wiesbaden and leads a charge of his 4 cruisers towards it, straight across the front of the German battle line. And so his flagship, HMS Defence, explodes. Everyone's killed. The next one, I think it's the Warrior, is the second one. That gets heavily damaged. Then the Duke of Edinburgh gets heavily damaged. It's an absolute mess. And then Hood's Invincible damages the Lutzov. And then the German battle line fires on Invincible and she blows up. And there's only about 9 survivors from that. And to give an example of the confusion, on one of the British battleships, they see Invincible explode. And they see all these men go into the water. And they cheer because they think it's a German battleship. And as they get closer, they see the Royal Navy White Ensign in the water and suddenly realise what's happening. So it just evolves into absolute confusion at that point. And then Scheer goes through, he's got everyone in formation, they come out through the mists, and all in front of him is just a line of British battleships.
And the Royal Navy at this point has by far superior numbers than the German high seas fleet. But still, it's a pretty contentious battle with both sides taking a lot of damage. As the day is progressing now, what shakes out in terms of what I would call the second stage of this battle?
Well, this is where Scheer is faced with a massive decision. He can either try and get into a gun duel with the British, or he could follow his orders to preserve the Grand Fleet. No, sorry, preserve the High Seas Fleet. And so he issues, and I'm going to try not to get my pronunciation messed up. The German Navy have this one manoeuvre that they practice time and time again, and it's the Gefechtskehrtwendung nach Starboard, which basically means everybody turn 180 degrees starboard, and the whole fleet will wheel round and go the other direction. And they perform this manoeuvre absolutely seamlessly whilst under fire and returning fire against the British. They then send in their destroyers to fire off as many torpedoes as possible to kind of disrupt the British line, to kind of cover the withdrawal. About 20 minutes later, the German fleet come back out of the mist to give the Grand Fleet another go, because they're hoping that they've got off their line, only to find Jellicoe is still in position, still raining down heavy caliber shells. And so they perform this manoeuvre again. I won't try and butcher my pronunciation a second time. And the whole fleet turn around, and he sends the battlecruisers in what's often referred to as the death ride of the battlecruisers, because they get pounded, absolutely hammered by all the British battleships. I'd encourage anyone to go away and after this and Google SMS Seydlitz Battle of Jutland. The state she was in when she got back to Germany, like she'd taken on something like 5,000 tons of water. So her prow was about a metre above the sea line, just from all the damage that they took. It was absolutely horrendous. But they also managed to withdraw as well, and the German fleet head south and hope that darkness will cover their withdrawal. They unfortunately leave a couple of damaged ships behind, like the Wiesbaden is completely lost. The Frauenlob also, they're just taken apart by the British. And then Jellicoe moves to pursue. But the British don't know night fighting. We don't do that in the First World War, and prior to that, you can't fight at night. We don't have radar. Why would we fight at night? But the Germans have got big, powerful searchlights on their battleships, and although they don't want to fight, they're more capable of dealing with night actions. But Jellicoe's plan is to cut past Scheer and be in off the Jade Estuary, so that when the sun comes up in the morning, the Royal Navy's between the Germans and home, and then he can take them apart at his leisure, which doesn't work.
So we're coming to the end of May the 31st, 1916. The Grand Fleet is hoping to wait until dawn to re-engage. So as dawn breaks on June 1st now, what unfolds?
When the sun comes up, the German Navy are mostly home. Most of them get back by about 5 a.m. in the morning, and the British are in completely the wrong position, because during the night, the Germans crossed behind Jellicoe's wake. So the two fleets kind of pass each other, and the British see them. There are different battleships, British battleships, that see German warships going behind them, but they don't tell Jellicoe, because they presume he already knows, or they don't want to give away their own position. And where they can see, there's a lot of destroyer actions going on during the night. The pre-dreadnought battleship Pommern gets sunk, and several other warships get damaged by torpedoes. The Black Prince joins a column of ships, believing they're Royal Navy, only to find out it's the battleship Thuringen, which brings on its spotlights and at point-blank range sinks her with all hands. HMS Spitfire, a destroyer, rams the dreadnought Nassau, and the Nassau brings its guns down as low as it can and fires at Spitfire. Doesn't hit it, but the shockwave that comes from the shells rips the superstructure of Spitfire away completely and leaves her quite badly damaged. So the night action it's all piecemeal, little bits going on here and there, and no one really realises until the sun comes up that Scheer has got away with comparatively much smaller losses. Although the battlecruiser Lutzow, because of its heavy damage, was scuttled to stop it falling into enemy hands. Allegedly, there were some of the crew trapped below decks, and allegedly, as she was sunk, they were all singing the Deutschlandlieder. But many German sailors have said no, they weren't. People were just generally hacked off that these men were sacrificed and not saved.
Right. So the High Seas Fleet didn't intend on engaging the entire Grand Fleet. However, would it be fair to say that they actually did and got away with it?
Yeah. I'll probably get in trouble with a lot of Royal Navy historians. However, those that know me know where I stand on this. The Battle of Jutland is very contentious because there is no clear winner. Arguably, the British won because the German fleet, they did come out again in 1916, and they were still very active, but they never came out in force this level again. The Germans will claim that they won because they completed all of their objectives, and they did. But arguably the British Navy within 24 hours, the Royal Navy could put back to sea with more ships than the German Navy had available. The German Navy couldn't put back to sea with its whole force for 2 months. So the way I argue it is, I draw another First World War comparison. The first day of the Somme is a resounding. Britain gets some land territory, but the level of casualties are horrendous, and everyone talks about it being one of the greatest calamities in the Western Front in 1916. But by the end of October 1916, the Battle of the Somme is won by the Allies, and the Germans have fought back. Jutland is 1 day in a 4-year campaign. So for me, it's neither side won, but it doesn't necessarily decide the outcome of the war, because the German fleet could have come out again, but there was concern that that if they carried on winning battles to this level, they would soon lose the war. And there were a lot of strong voices within the U-boat arm towards the end of 1916 who were arguing for another unrestricted U-boat warfare campaign, because they believed if they could stop Britain getting something like 600,000 tons, if they could sink 600,000 tons a month, then they could win the war before America got involved, because Britain would have to resign from shortages. And they could do all that before America could get its troops together and send them to the Western Front. Didn't pan out that way.
It is an interesting battle to analyze because if you just look at the numbers alone, the Royal Navy suffered more ships lost, more more sailors lost. However, like you said, they prevented the German fleet from essentially breaking through and causing chaos in the North Sea. So in that aspect, it was a victory. But for the Germans, they did inflict more damage, and that really was their goal because they didn't have the numbers. They could never engage the Grand Fleet head to head, and they were able to escape and get back to Germany. But in the grand scheme of things, like you said, the Royal Navy could put back to sea much faster. They had greater resources, greater numbers. The German High Seas Fleet never again really played much of a role as far as having any kind of head-to-head battles.
Except in the Baltic.
Okay, yeah.
They were quite heavily involved against the Russians.
It's funny how we Westerners can forget about the Eastern Front.
But no, it's because I'm a German fleet apologist.
Well, you're as a historian, you're being objective, so I think that's proper. And of course, as an American, I shouldn't have anything to say about it because we weren't there at the time. But just looking at it, though, objectively, like I said, it's there were quite a few casualties on both sides. It would be fair to say that they both have achieved their objectives, and you could also say neither achieved their objectives. So, like I said, it's a little bit interesting to look at if you're trying to figure out who came out with an advantage.
Absolutely, and one of the comparisons I like to draw is in a football/soccer way. It's like in the World Cup. England want to win, and there's this, but Jutland is like the World Cup. England want a massive victory. They want to win the World Cup, and they want to go home. And as far as everyone in England is concerned, every time the World Cup starts, we're going to win it. But we always lose to the Germans on penalties. And this is one of those times. It's often referred. I refer to it as a score draw. It's like a 1-1 score draw.
Okay.
The German fleet went out. They caused damage. They got home, but they didn't achieve all their objectives. The British fleet went out, did some damage, forced the German fleet to withdraw, but they didn't destroy them. So 1-1. No one really wins. We'll see you at penalties.
That's a great analogy. I like that. Would it be correct to say that perhaps within the Royal Navy itself and as well as the general public, it was seen more as a failure because they didn't destroy the High Seas Fleet?
Oh, absolutely. The other thing is, and I'm going to quote the great naval historian Peter Hart, in naval being in the Navy is great until it goes wrong, and then it goes really, really wrong. Take, for example, the battlecruisers, the amount of death on those. But when these warships are coming back into port and they are shattered, again, if anyone wants to Google image HMS Chester or HMS Lion post Jutland, there's blood all over the place. There are massive, great gaping holes. There are bodies coming off and being buried. It looks like a defeat. To anyone that's anywhere near one of these naval bases, it looks like a defeat. The Germans, within 24 hours, have put out a press release saying they've won. And they overstate. Naturally, everybody overstates how many ships they've sunk. But they reckon they've sunk about 4 battleships. And so they're very quick to come out and say, we've won. But for everyone in Britain, just as civilians, it's just the losses. I mean, like I said, there was 1,200 people killed on one ship alone. I think there was 6,000 deaths from the British that day, which is not a small amount. Thankfully, my 2 family members that were there weren't scratched. So, but many other people lost quite a lot of loved ones. And then there's lots of questions within the Royal Navy of, hang on, how the hell did you let the Germans get away? And that starts almost within 24 hours. The Admiralty are asking questions. There's inquiries. As I said, there's letters. Beatty quickly trying to cover his tracks for all his cock-ups. Jellicoe trying to put forward what went on and how it happened, and I managed to acquire a copy of Beatty's papers and Jellicoe's papers, and Beatty's have got lots of letters to lots of different people saying, well, as of this letter, where were you, or what were you doing? And so there are lots of questions, and how will we deal with them again if they come out again? And next time we've got to make sure we absolutely trounce them. Because all the time the German fleet are there, you've got to keep the Royal Navy at Scapa in case they come out again.
That sounds very similar for American listeners. The many battles of the American Civil War, the Union Army, you could say, technically won many battles. Antietam, Battle of Shiloh come to mind. They suffered more casualties, but in the end took the ground and the Confederate Army retreated. But then President Lincoln was furious that the Union Army didn't pursue and destroy the Confederate Army. So it was a victory, so to speak, but not entirely.
Yeah. Everyone wants big battles where you've got a clear winner and a loser, like Waterloo. The French withdraw, you've won the battle, or Trafalgar, the Franco-Spanish fleet get decimated, or even the Battle of the Falklands in 1914, the German fleet gets taken apart. Jutland, there is this score draw of, okay, we did some damage, but they're still there. And that's both sides saying that, so...
Now, this battle also had some historic significance in terms of what kinds of ships were being used, the future of those ships. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, this is sort of the biggest... I think it's the only battle between dreadnoughts in the First World War at all. Most of the naval actions that have happened before that were carried out when it's got battleships involved have been the pre-dreadnoughts down in the Mediterranean and the Dardanelles. So this is where we see sort of the massive naval investiture that the British have had and the Germans have had in these warships. And they only ever see action this once. But several of the names go on to be quite famous. Not so much for the German Navy, because most of them get scuttled in 1919 in Scapa Flow during the surrender. But there's the one German ship that I'd like everyone to know is the Schleswig-Holstein, which is one of the pre-dreadnought Deutschland class of the 4th Battle Group. She goes on to fire the first shots of World War II at Gdynia, or Gdansk, and Danzig off Poland on September 1st, 1939. For the British, some great names that also come up in World War II. You have the Queen Elizabeth, the Malaya, the Valiant, and most importantly, as I said, the greatest battleship in history, which is HMS Warspite. Many people will say that the greatest warship was the Bismarck or the Yamato or one of the Iowas or the Missouri. They're all wrong. It's Warspite. She's an absolute machine. She serves through the First World War. She's at Jutland. Yeah, she gets damaged and ends up sailing in a circle for about an hour, drawing loads of German fire. But she goes on through the Second World War. She's involved in the Mediterranean. I think she's at Cape Matapan. She gets hit by a German radio-controlled bomb and still stays afloat. In fact, when she turns up at D-Day, she fires the most shots there. She fires so much that she has to go back to Portsmouth to get new gun barrels and come back the second day. But if you look at the photos, her third turret isn't firing because that was the one that was hit by the bomb, so they've just packed it with concrete to stop it from being damaged. And she's even when they tow her to get scrapped, she breaks her line and beaches at Prussian Cove because she just refuses to go quietly. I'm halfway through writing a Substack about why she's the greatest battleship in history, because she's just unstoppable. She's our greatest warship ever, I think.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you because you are far more knowledgeable about battleships than I am. But battleships have an interesting history, though, because, in World War II, battleships were still around, but you could point to the destruction of HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse in 1940 as kind of the beginning of the end of battleships, because they were sunk entirely by Japanese airplanes. Aircraft carriers had kind of supplanted and made battleships more or less obsolete during World War II. But, going back to World War I, the battleships, dreadnoughts were quite powerful. But even in World War I, this was the only head-to-head battle of battleships. So, it's an interesting history to look back on.
Yeah, there've been some near misses where they almost had battleship on battleship action, but Jutland was the only real one, especially between the German and British fleets. So, like I said, I think that's why there was so much pressure on it to be so much more than it actually was, especially after the amount of investment that both countries had put into them.
Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure to talk to you about the Battle of Jutland and waxing nostalgically about battleships and warspite. Can you tell everybody, please, how they can find your work and listen to you and read more from you?
Yeah, sure. I'm on social media. I don't really do Twitter anymore for many different reasons, but I'm on Blue Sky. If you can find me by the geeky backstory behind my handle is I'm a bit of a Star Wars nerd, and there was a typo on a Star Wars card back in the late 90s, and so Moff Jerry Gerard, who's the guy who builds the second Death Star, they put an I in there. So if you look for Jerry Gerard 14, you'll find me pretty much anywhere. I think that's my Substack handle as well, which is where I publish. I do like a short article once a week, podcast once a week, which is grandly named Maritime History with Me, Live and Unplugged, because I can't figure out how to do editing. And then I do a major article once a week, usually for the paid subscribers, but I do release them periodically for general reading as well. I've been doing a series on pre-dreadnought battleships in the Dardanelles, which has been going out on general release, which has been taking up a lot of time. But yeah, that's basically where you can find me in most places.
And like I said, I do follow you on Blue Sky, and I read your Substack and listen to your podcast, and I'm a fan. Highly recommend it to all my listeners. So
thanks.
Thanks again, Chris. It was a pleasure speaking to you today.
Likewise, Rich, and I'll put the check in the post for you.
He's joking. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, edited, and produced by me, Rich Napolitano. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried. For ad-free listening, please subscribe at patreon.com/shipwreckspod, now with 3 tiers to choose from, starting at just $5 a month. All tiers get ad-free episodes and bonus episodes with different perks for joining. Go to patreon.com/shipwreckspod to subscribe. You can also join the Officers Club now directly through Apple Podcasts for just $4.99 a month. Simply find Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs on Apple Podcasts and click the banner to subscribe. Last but not least, please be sure to rate and review Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please join me again next time. And as always, don't forget to wear your life jackets.